Je suis ravie de vous retrouver pour la suite de ce forum franco-allemand de l'énergie. C'est la
I'm
8e
delighted to see
édition.
you
Je vous
again
rappelle, un 22
for
janvier
this
qui est une
8th
date particulière. On en a
Franco-German
parlé
Energy
en
Forum, the
introduction.
22nd
C'est la
of
journée
January, which is a very special
franco-allemande, mais aussi les
date,
20 ans de l'Office franco-allemand pour la
celebrating
transition
Franco-German Friendship,
énergétique.
and
Ce
also
forum est organisé en
20
collaboration
years
avec
since
le
the
ministère
founding of the
fédéral
Franco-German
allemand
Office for
de
Energy
l'économie et de l'énergie,
Transition.
le ministère
We're
français de
working
l'économie,
with
des
the German
finances,
Federal
de la
Ministry for
souveraineté
Economic
industrielle,
Affairs and
énergétique
Energy,
et
the French
numérique,
Ministry of
le
Economics,
ministère fédéral
Finance,
allemand des affaires
Industrial Energy
étrangères
and
et
Digital
donc
Sovereignty,
l'Office
and the
franco-allemand
German
pour la transition
Federal
énergétique.
Foreign Office,
Le
and
thème
of course the
principal, la
Franco-German
sécurité
Office for the
d'approvisionnement
Energy
en France,
Transition.
en
We're
Allemagne
focusing
et dans l'Union
primarily
européenne,
on
les
security of
besoins, le
supply in
développement des réseaux
France,
et les
Germany, and the
interconnexions. Et
EU
justement, ça va
requirements,
être le thème de
grid
notre
expansion and
dialogue
interconnectors. That indeed
franco-allemand
is what we're
autour de
going
la
to look at
sécurité
now
d'approvisionnement
in
électrique
our
en France et en
Franco-German
Allemagne,
dialogue,
les
looking at
priorités,
security of
les
supply in
objectifs
France
nationaux et les
and in
actions
Germany, the
communes. Nous
priorities,
allons avoir une
national
trentaine de
objectives,
minutes d'échange
and
et vous pourrez
joint
poser vos
actions
questions
around
en ligne, donc n'hésitez pas à le faire. Je
30
rappelle
minutes
aussi
for
pour les
our
interprètes
discussion,
qui font
and
un
then
super
there
travail
will
de
be
parler aussi
questions.
lentement que possible. Je suis
Now,
ravie
do please
d'accueillir
speak as slowly as
Monsieur
possible
Jan
for the
Christophe
interpreters, who are,
Wellershoff.
by the way, doing a great
Bonjour.
job. I'm delighted to
Merci
welcome
beaucoup
Mr.
d'être
Jan
avec nous.
Christoph
Vous êtes
Wellershoff. Thank you
sous-directeur suppléant
for
du
being with
département
us. You're the
électricité au
Deputy
sein du
Head of
ministère fédéral
Department
de
for the
l'économie et de
Electricity
l'énergie
Department in the
et
Federal
ravi aussi
Ministry of
d'accueillir
Economic
Monsieur
Affairs and
Jean-Sylvestre
Energy.
Giraud. Bonjour.
And I'm also
Vous êtes
delighted
adjoint
to
au
welcome
directeur de l'énergie
Jean-Sylvestre
au
Giraud,
sein du ministère de
Deputy
l'économie,
Director
des
for
finances
Energy
et de la
in the
souveraineté
French
industrielle,
Ministry
énergétique et
of
numérique. Je vais vous poser à
Economics,
chacun
Finance,
trois
Industrial
questions qui
Energy
sont
and
les mêmes
Digital
questions
Sovereignty.
à
So I'm
tour
going
de
to
rôle.
put three
Vous avez du
questions
temps
to
pour y
each
répondre à
of you,
travers, puisqu'on a
and you will
environ
have
une
time
demi-heure
to
d'échange.
respond. We've got
J'aimerais
round about
commencer
half
par
an
vous,
hour for
Monsieur
the debate. I'm going to
Wellershoff,
start
par vous
with you,
demander
Mr.
quels sont les
Vellershoff.
objectifs
And I'd
nationaux
like to
et
ask
les
you,
grands défis
what
auxquels
are
vous
the
êtes
national
confrontés en
goals
Allemagne
and
dans le
major
domaine de
challenges that
l'électricité.
you face in Germany when it comes to the electricity sector?
Ja, einen schönen guten Tag in die Runde auch von mir
Thank you. Well,
und vielen Dank,
good
Frau
morning
Croiset, für
from
die
me as well, and thank you
Einführungen.
very much
Es
for
sind
that
sicherlich
introduction.
herausfordernde Zeiten, in denen wir
Now, of
leben.
course, we live in a
Unsere
challenging era.
Rahmenbedingungen ändern sich rasant,
The general
sicherheitspolitisch
regulatory
und
framework and the framework
wettbewerbspolitisch. Und
overall
beides
is
hat
changing at
natürlich auch
high speed
Auswirkungen auf die
in terms of
Energiepolitik.
regulation, in terms of competition. That has an
Stammen in Deutschland
impact
schon fast 60%
upon energy
unseres
policy as well.
Stroms
Around
aus
about
Wind, Sonne
60%
und
of
Co.
our electricity
Das ist ein großer
is from
Erfolg und
renewables now. That's a
gleichzeitig geht
great
er einher mit
success,
Veränderungen, die wir
but it goes
adressieren
hand in
müssen.
hand with changes which we
So
must
übersteigt etwa in
address.
Deutschland
For example, in
phasenweise das
Germany, in certain
Erzeugungspotenzial aus
phases,
Solar
the
die
potential for
Nachfrage.
generation
Damit das nicht
from
zu
solar
Problemen führt,
energy
haben wir
is greater
national
than
eine
demand.
Lösung
To avoid
gefunden.
problems, we've found a
Gleichzeitig müssen
solution
wir
nationally,
sicherstellen, dass
but
wir
at
die
the same time,
Versorgungssicherheit
we need
auch
to
in
ensure
Zeiten
that
mit wenig
security
Wind und
of
wenig Sonne
supply
sicherstellen.
is also guaranteed when
Um uns den neuen
there is
Herausforderungen
not
im
much sun and
Energiebereich
not much
faktenbasiert und auch auf
wind.
realistischer
We want to have a
Grundlage zu stellen,
fact-based
hat das
approach and a
Bundeswirtschaftsministerium
realistic
hat
basis.
Bundeswirtschaftsministerin Katharina Reiche gleich nach ihrem Amtsantritt ein
Katharina
Monitoring
Reiche,
der Energiewende in
the federal
Auftrag gegeben.
minister,
Wir müssen die Frage
commissioned
beantworten,
monitoring
wie
of the
sich
energy
der
transition.
Energiebedarf
Immediately after
und der
taking office, we need
Strombedarf
to
in
look
den
at
nächsten
how
Jahren
the
entwickeln
need for
wird.
energy and electricity
Diese
will
externe Evaluierung hat uns
evolve
einige
over the next
wertvolle
few years. Now, this
Erkenntnisse und
external
Hinweise
evaluation
gegeben.
has
Das
provided
Monitoring
some useful
zeigt,
insights for us.
dass
The
die
monitoring
Energiewende
shows
erfolgreich sein kann.
that the energy
Wir
transition
müssen
can
jedoch die
indeed be
Systemkosten und die
successful. However,
Versorgungssicherheit stärker als
we
bisher
need
in den Blick nehmen.
to focus more on
Zentrales
security
Ziel
of
des
supply and control of
BMWE
cost. The
ist eine
central goal
verlässliche und
of the German
bezahlbare
Federal Ministry for
Energieversorgung als
Economic
Grundlage
Affairs and
einer
Energy
wettbewerbsfähigen
is
Wirtschaft
a
unter
reliable and
gleichzeitiger
affordable supply
Erreichung
of
der
energy as the
Klimaziele.
basis for a competitive
Die
economy,
Herausforderungen,
while
vor
at the
denen
same
wir im
time attaining the
Strombereich stehen,
climate
sind
goals.
zahlreich.
We
So
face a
gilt es
whole host
etwa,
of
den Zubau
challenges.
von
On
erneuerbaren
the electricity
Anlagen,
front,
von
on the one hand, we're
Stromspeichern und
looking at renewable
Elektrolyseuren
facilities,
räumlich zu koordinieren und zu
at
synchronisieren.
electrolyzers and at
Flexibilitäten
storage
anzureizen und die
facilities. We
Voraussetzungen
need
für
to
deren
have
Nutzung
incentives to make
zu
the
schaffen.
system more flexible
Die
and to create
Digitalisierung unseres
the conditions
Energiesystems ist noch
for
nicht da,
utilizing
wo sie
them.
sein sollte und muss nun
We
schnell
haven't made as much
vorangetrieben
headway as
werden.
we should on electrification. We need to
Netzausbaubedarfe müssen
move ahead
optimiert
rapidly.
werden und
Grid
vorhandene
expansion needs to be
Netzinfrastruktur deutlich
optimized and
effizienter
existing
genutzt werden.
grid
Gleichzeitig gilt
infrastructure
es,
needs
die
to be used
Versorgungssicherheit auch
more
in
efficiently. At the
Zukunft
same
immer zu
time,
gewährleisten,
we need to
auch
ensure security of
und
supply in the
insbesondere durch
future
einen
too,
technologieoffenen
and that's
Kapazitätsmarkt.
partly through
Statt alles bis
an
ins
approach
kleinste
that's
Detail zu
open to all
regulieren, was ich tue,
technologies,
aus meiner
rather
Sicht besonders
than
wichtig,
having
müssen wir
rules and
dem Markt
regulations
mehr
for the
Raum
tiniest details. We need to offer greater scope to the market than has been the case to date and offer scope to take action. System costings will be crucial in the future. That means the costs both for generation and for storage facilities. Thank you for that initial reply. And I'd like now to ask the same question to Mr. Jean-Sylvestre Giraud. What are the national challenges and goals for France when it comes to the electricity sector? Well, thank you. Good morning to everybody. And all the best to the Franco-German Office for its 20th anniversary. I think it's fair to say that France and Germany face the same major challenge, decarbonising our economies while securing energy security and competitiveness. To attain climate neutrality, we must cut our energy consumption, particularly of fossil energy, and boost production of decarbonised energy now, thanks to its electric mix in France, which is 95% decarbonised thanks to renewables and the nuclear sector. France has decarbonised its electricity mix and can ensure its energy sovereignty. We're looking at building new nuclear facilities. There's a programme to build 6 new EPR21 of around 10 gigawatts to ensure the energy security of France and Europe and attain our carbon neutrality goals. Those should be online by 2038. Over and above that, around 2/3 of our energy consumption is still based on imported fossil fuels. That makes us vulnerable to the geopolitical context and stands in the way of our ecological transition goals. So to move away from that dependency and ensure our energy resilience without jeopardizing our lifestyle, we need to electrify uses for mobility, for housing, for industry. So electrification is one of our priorities for 2026. We're looking to 640 terawatt hours in 2035. That's growth of 42% vis-à-vis the 449 terawatt hours of electricity consumed in France in 2025. So boosting electricity consumption is at the heart of our approach. We're focusing on encouraging greater rollout of electricity use as the heart of our strategy. It's a huge strategic technological challenge. We need to ensure uptime, reliability and resilience of the electrical system at the best cost possible as well, and ensure that it can deal with variations in consumption and in generation. The question of the grid is crucial as well. Network managers are going to have to develop and adapt grids to integrate new generation capacities and new consumers in the context of climate change as well, and ensure that these new flows do not cut the commercial capacity of interconnections. Well, yes, you've looked at the goals now. We're moving on now to political questions and the question of the political challenges. So let me turn to you now, Mr. Jan-Christoph Wellershoff. What can you tell us about the type of political measures that have been put in place to respond to the challenges you addressed and to ensure that you have a resilient yet affordable energy system? Thank you. Well, we're just talking about the challenges. We face challenges in both France and in Germany, and we're seeking to grapple with and address those in Germany. The German Ministry has an ambitious work programme in this context, and here affordability and sustainable cost systems are to be more in the focus of our attention. At the same time, however, we need to ensure a high level of security of supply to ensure acceptance for the energy transition as a whole. I'd like to talk to you about the measures we have in 4 different areas where we need to tap into more investment, both to ensure affordability and security of supply. Let's start with the topic that's currently very high on the agenda, and that is power stations. We've had intensive and constructive discussions with the European Commission and have reached an agreement on the cornerstones for a strategy for nuclear facilities. Those provide the framework to implement a range of measures to ensure electricity generation in Germany that tallies with the European strategy. So the power station strategy will be part of an overall strategy to ensure supply of electricity in Germany. That also includes introducing a comprehensive capacity market in the course of 2027. And from 2032, that will ensure there are sufficient controllable systems within the overall system. So the capacity market is still being discussed. Now, these measures are something that we absolutely have to implement in Germany if we are to attain the ambitious goals that we have set. We want to phase out both nuclear facilities and also coal-fired power stations as well by 2038. Now, to ensure security of supply in Germany, we need massive investment in energy infrastructure. As we look to expansion of the electricity grid, we need to make substantial progress in the transmission and distribution network. There's a huge need for expansion that has to be funded somehow or other. Financing of infrastructure is of inestimable importance. The federal government has launched an energy infrastructure fund to that end that provides state guarantees to ensure investment in the transmission system and the distribution system. And of course, in tangible terms, we want to ensure that we can get the requisite additional investments needed through state guarantees for financing banks, and via the KfW, we want to ensure that it's possible to have investment on a large or very large scale. Furthermore, at the European level, it's crucial that we strengthen the European single market for energy and expand cross-border infrastructure. We need to identify interconnectors that are needed and move ahead on those, and that's particularly for those that are key for the overall system. Cross-border infrastructure is being boosted thanks to the Commission's grids package. We also need more rapid implementation of the grids. With less red tape, we need more rapid permitting processes. Accelerating these is moving ahead. We've had positive experience with that also through the gas supply crisis. We're looking to rapid expansion of infrastructure in the light of the expansion of renewables as well. So we've seen what's happening on the German side with 4 strategic priorities that you have developed. I'd like to hand over now to Mr. Jean-Sylvestre Giraud. And of course, this dialogue also offers an opportunity to address questions from the audience. If you have any, please do put them to us. So, Mr. Giraud, which political measures have been put in place in France also to ensure that there's a resilient, affordable energy system? There'll be a need for flexibility, but that's not the whole story, I believe. Thank you. The key priority in France for security of supply correlates with what my German colleague said. That's the capacity mechanisms. We've revised our capacity mechanism to make them more efficient and ensure that we can provide support for flexibility. The Commission approved that in 2025, and in the European electricity market reform in 2024, that was underlined. That ensures that all of the member states reinforce their mechanisms. And this mechanism needs to be neutral in technological terms so that they're economically efficient, and that ensures the best price for consumers. It's vital that all capacity contributes to security of supply, and they also have to focus on cutting the carbon footprint. We need to think about storage as well. Technological neutrality must be a pillar for all of the technology, both in terms of security of supply and in terms of decarbonisation. Over and above capacity mechanisms, we're also developing flexibility in consumption because we have price incentives so that we move away consumption from peaks to off-peak areas. We've got nuanced bans in terms of pricing to ensure that the grid does not become saturated. There's various different ways that we can do that. We have smart meters. We call them Linky in France. More than 95% of French consumers have those in France at present, which is quite remarkable. We also have more price signals in close cooperation with our regulatory body. That ensures that consumers shift their consumption to periods when there's more production of energy, and they cut back because there are higher prices when there's less electricity available or when there's more consumption. Anyway, we've got different rates for night and day. We also have appropriate internal price signals. We look at the production based on solar power peaks as well. When there's the most sun, of course, the prices will vary because more electricity can be produced using solar power. And then there's also production assets, renewable assets. We've got support mechanisms introduced there to ensure that the design of our support mechanisms sends out the right incentives. That means there's no feed-in to the market when the market price is negative, and from a certain level they take part in the grid adjustment mechanism. And that brings us to the third question in this dialogue. And do feel free to put your questions. We got some coming in, but as we're talking about the Franco-German dialogue, right from the outset, I've mentioned that. I'd like to hear what you think as well about this. I'll start off with Mr. Wellershoff on this. What can you tell us about the joint reactions at the European level, at the Franco-German level?
Well, thank you for that. I think it's a very important question, and I think especially since the new government took office here in Germany, France and Germany join in a determination to make Europe competitive again. We want strong companies, we want attractive jobs, we want our economies to grow again. And on our joint Toulon agenda for Franco-German industry, we've agreed on a number of shared projects, and many of these relate to the energy sector. In energy, we want to strengthen our bilateral coordination and in Europe develop a competitive, safe, secure, clean energy market. In electricity, for example, we're working for affordable network fees and electricity charges, and we're also looking at appropriate legal framework from the EU. We're looking at strengthening a number of energy technologies and reducing the bureaucracy surrounding these processes. We've agreed on a number of common initiatives which could serve the EU as examples. In power, for example, we are working together more closely on cross-border energy markets. We want to review further interconnectors, and we are also working with Poland on this area. In hydrogen, too, we've made some significant progress. At European level, we support the EU Commission's initiative in setting up the grids package, which serves further integration. And if we are able to tap into this additional potential for generation in Europe and match that with additional need, then for all of us in Europe, that would mean lower costs, greater efficiency, and more competitiveness, and more security. And I think Germany and France are perhaps more than anyone else working very closely on these issues together. So some issues have already been raised by Mr. Wellershoff, and let's now ask our French representative to respond in the same way. There are other cooperations underway, of course, apart from those between France and Germany, but what can you tell us? Yes, it's true. Last year was an opportunity for a striking relaunch of cooperation between France and Germany on the 29th of August in Toulon. And I think we're all delighted that this Franco-German dialogue is happening. We're all aware of the importance of these issues, and energy is one of the priorities on this economic agenda. The first important measure to continue pursuing the security of the electricity supply, not only by our two countries, but by the EU, has been to encourage technologies for decarbonization. And that means recognizing the complementarity between the different energy mixes that we have across Europe, because we're all interdependent. In May, there was that joint meeting between Merz and Macron, and then in May, the Commission and its package. And it's an honor for our country to be hosting many of these activities. In terms of the security of supply in this interconnected market, it seems to us important that the member states open up to cross-border cooperation, and that we serve one another in this way, in making our energy more secure. And that will improve the capacity mechanism as approved by the European Union. Through our complementarity, we're also working with our French colleagues on regulating the location and management of bottlenecks and a future network code for flexibility and response to demand. We have a bilateral group with Germany, and we're working with Poland, as my colleague has already mentioned, on investment in the power networks. And under the monitoring of the ministries concerned, so that the French, German and Polish ministries are working together on the grids package. We have the most interconnected model in the world, and this is a key to the security of supply and serving the markets. We want to strengthen coordination of these networks, respecting the subsidiarity principle, as Europe requires. Regional cooperation is very important here, and members affected by similar issues can get together with their TSOs to identify and prioritize investment. These are the people who have the competence and the knowledge required. So, we've completed the exchange between the two of you, but we have received some questions from our audience. And of course, if you have any more questions, carry on sending them, as long as we can take them. I'll begin with questions for Mr. Giraud. You're talking about the security of energy supply, especially in winter, and you're talking about moving this year from a decentralized to a centralized mechanism. Can you tell us why this reform and what the features of this new system are? Yes, thank you. Yes, it's true. The current mechanism, until the change take place, we had a decentralized mechanism where the suppliers had an obligation to simplify things, to submit a number of certificates to prove that they had the capacity to either buy or generate what they wanted to sell on to other producers, and that related also to the security of supply. We notified the Commission because there's a certain time where you have to notify them of a change of system, a renewal, and this system worked well, but there was room for improvement, and we were able to draw on the experience of our European partners, Belgium, the UK, who have a different system, a centralized system. And the idea was to have a certificated exchange volumes. There's an auction system, which means that we have perhaps better transparency over the mechanism, and that's why we undertook the reform. There are some other questions for you, Monsieur Giraud, but I'm going to ask a question now to Mr. Wellershoff. A question about the German strategy for power stations. Can you tell us a little more specifically about the content of this German strategy and the next stages of implementation and so forth? Yes, thank you. Yes, true. The issue here in Germany, the power strategy, is also about capacity markets, and here too they're hot potatoes. We're looking, of course, with great interest towards France, and we've been talking to our colleagues about this because we are quite excited to see what experience they have with various different instruments, and we want to benefit from it too. The aim being to enhance the efficiency of the systems in Europe on the basis of capacity markets. In Germany, we're in a situation now where the pressure to take some action on capacity markets had considerably increased. I mentioned it before. Phasing out both nuclear and coal has been a challenge to the energy system, and we can see in the system now in winter, increasingly we're seeing very high peak prices, which suggest that there may be shortages around those times. And from the point of view of energy security, that's not dramatic, but it does indicate that the system is tightening. So we need to respond to that. And we talked to the Commission about a roadmap with a number of pillars. And the first step would be to have a capacity mechanism in certain places for the years up to 31. And we would take the usual approach. We look at the dispatchable capacity required for those years, and then we start to look at an agnostic call for tenders. This would be carried out in 2026, that's this year, at least that's our plan. And then in 2027 and then in 2029, there would be a response to that. And also bearing in mind the demand for energy security, the calls for tender would in 2026 include a long-term criterion. That is a requirement, a technical requirement, that capacity has to be able to generate continuous energy over a certain period. We think that new power stations can meet this criterion, but the tenders we receive will demonstrate whether that is the case. For us as Germany, that is, if you like, a prelude to the capacity mechanism. For the capacity mechanism that would then kick on from 2032, on an enduring basis, we would need a bit more time, because that's a rather more complex matter. It needs to be sustainable by design. And in 2027, we want to introduce this. And to come back to what I said in the beginning, we hope to draw on the experience of other countries such as France, Poland, the UK, and look to see what the most efficient system might be. I have another question for Mr. Wellershoff about the industrial tariffs for power. Germany is hoping to introduce an industrial electricity tariff to make its industry more competitive. When can we hope to get a definitive agreement with the European Commission? To be quite honest, it's not a simple question for me, because the responsibility for industrial power prices does not rest with my department. You'd need to ask the industry department about that. But one thing is clear, we're very pleased that the European Commission, as part of its Clean Industrial State Aid framework, set a framework last year for an industrial tariff for electricity. We intend to implement that. The aim being, and that would be in 2026, to relieve the burden on industrial players. That will happen very quickly. Now, I don't want to preempt what my colleagues plan to do and suggest any dates, but certainly it's in the pipeline. It will happen. But something I need to say clearly is that this is just one module, because the urgent issue, I mentioned competitiveness in Europe. There's a question we need to address the price of power, and the German government has initiated a whole number of measures, including the reduction of tax on certain consumers' electricity bills, network fees, and we've also the possibility of shifting the burden to other consumers is being done away with. So once we start doing this, that will lead to considerable relief for consumers, above all companies and industry. I think it's an important part. At European level, in connection with the emissions trading in Europe, the compensation of electricity prices is an important issue for us, because that's important to companies. We think we're on the right road towards an overall package so that competitiveness in Europe can be enhanced. Thank you for that answer. I now have a question for Sylvestre Giraud. Two questions for you. The first relates to planning the networks. You were talking about that. What new tools for governance do you have for enhancing regional cooperation in planning these networks? Thank you. We're talking about the European level now? Yes. Because national planning is another matter. Yes, so on planning the networks, I did indicate that France has attracted a great deal of respect, and France has a great deal of respect for subsidiarity principle in the European Treaty, and I think it's important to take decisions where they are most relevant. And as I said, the competence and the knowledge about developing the systems, the networks, which are so vital to interconnections, lie on the whole with the regulators and the TSOs. And so the European top-down approach towards the member states has been to strengthen this intermediate level at regional level, where a number of different member states in the energy sector can get together. France, for example, is a member of a region that includes Benelux and also a region that includes Spain and Portugal. So it could be interesting to reinforce the structures in a way that would enable peer review to generate confidence between the different players, the states, the TSOs, and so on, so that each of us better understand the constraints under which the others are acting, so that we can then optimize the interconnections and our domestic networks on each side of the border. That's the idea behind this, the idea that we can strengthen regional cooperation, which would be encouraged by peer review between countries. I have the same question for Mr. Veleshoff, and I'll be coming back to him in a moment, because there's a question about the role that you could play here in interconnection. But I do have another question for Jean-Sylvestre first, and this is a question about cybersecurity, which is one of the subjects that often crops up. We did mention it this morning. Berlin was recently the victim of a targeted attack on its infrastructure. What role does this play in the energy supply? I know that in France the system is more centralized. Does that pose a particular challenge in terms of security? Yes, thank you. Yes, it's true. It's a centralized issue an increasing issue, I would say, in energy security. And so far, it's perhaps not been the focus of discussions at European level or even at national level. But I do think it's a topic that will need to be taken on board increasingly. So we have European texts. We are working to strengthen the rules relating to cybersecurity, especially for power grids. In the difference in impact between a more or less centralized, decentralized system in terms of vulnerability to cyber attacks, I'm perhaps the best expert for answering that question. But I can say that one way of protecting ourselves, as with any critical infrastructure, is to have different systems that can complement one another and to have an interaction between the networks, because it perhaps helps to reconnect to the network. So this might help, but certainly cyber attacks will have to be taken into account more, both on the consumption side and on the generation side. Mr. Vellershoft, would you like to respond to this cybersecurity question? Jean-Sylvestre Giraud was just talking about interconnectors, and perhaps it's a question for both of you. What role does this play in safe energy supply in Germany? I think, first of all, on cybersecurity, that of course we're working hard on that as well. I don't know if you followed that. It's not so much about cybersecurity, but just after the new year, we had a major problem in some boroughs of Berlin after an attack, which the newspapers were full of course, and the people who lived there were very harshly impacted by it. Now, we knew, of course, in advance, but everyone working in the sector could see once again how important it is to have a well-functioning energy system. It's in the public interest, and that's why it is a major priority for us in terms of cybersecurity, but also possible physical attacks and technical outages with critical systems. So these are a central issue that we are certainly looking at, and where we have a close exchange with the energy sector, because at the end of the day, it's the energy sector here in Germany and also in France that has to respond ad hoc to cope with the problem, to deal with the problem. And we have to ensure that they have the financial and the regulatory or statutory framework in order to do that. Perhaps a couple of words. I did mention this earlier on grid expansion. Of course, that's a big issue for us too, and we welcome it that with the grids package, the Commission has come up with a proposal. From our point of view, it contains some important elements. Notably, with the planning of networks, we think it goes in the right direction, because optimizing the overall European system is at the core of this. If we want to build interconnectors in Europe, then we need interconnectors which will have the biggest possible impact on energy security, affordability of the systems, and in our view, the best way to go about that, or the best way of identifying that, is to consider an overall European scenario. I talked about accelerating the planning. That's also key to us, because we need to move away, and we have already considerably moved away from planning processes that, to put it crudely, last an eternity. We need leaner, more efficient permitting processes, and there the European Commission can help a great deal. So we would hope that in the grid package they become a little bolder and perhaps review this once again with some more audacious proposals.
On va arriver à la fin de ce dialogue. Est-ce que vous avez encore quelque chose à ajouter, Monsieur
Thank you. We're drawing towards the end of the dialogue. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Giraud, to wind up? I think we've looked at most of the key issues, and we realize how important interconnection is. Thank you to both of you for taking part in this Franco-German dialogue. We're drawing to the end of this morning session. We shall have a lunch break for everybody, and we'll see you again at 2 p.m. this afternoon. We'll be looking at security and reliability of the network. We'll be looking at both issues. We'll be hearing from Ms. Vargon, the CRE, and Mr. Klaus Müller from the German Federal Network Agency. It'll be interesting to hear about your views on this and to hear about how security of supply is being implemented. There'll be a round table as well, which will look into all this in greater detail. We'll look at the dimensioning and financing of the future energy system. Here again, we've talked about the issues when it comes to investment. Thank you for being with us. Thank you again to the interpreters. So we shall have a lunch break now until 2 p.m. for the next session of this forum. Thank you.